All right, thank you, Bailiff, for starting the recording. Again, welcome to all of you this afternoon, and congratulations for all being selected to compete at this year's Gladiator one-on-one mock trial competition. I'm calling the case of United States versus Kara Bassett. Scoring judges, please look to the two buttons on the lower left of your screen and turn off both your audio and video. These should remain off until the trial ends, and then I will ask you to please join all of us so that you can share your comments with us. Competitors, we are the same four who were involved in presiding and scoring round one. So I know our scoring attorneys have beyond outstanding credentials, and we'll have some great comments for you at the end of the trial. Okay, we will start now with the attorneys. If the counsel can please state their appearances, starting with the prosecution.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Catherine Morris, representing the people in today's trial. Today I'm assisted by my co-counsel, Ms. Kirkpatrick.
Good afternoon, Your Honor, opposing counsel, and members of the jury.
Good afternoon to both of you. And introductions by the defense counsel and second chair, please.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Linnea Stuart, and I am assisted by Hannah Lee, my second chair. You won't see her on screen, but she'll be helping me with demonstratives today. And we represent the defendant, Ms. Bassett, in today's case.
Thank you to both of you. We will now hear opening statements from each party. Everyone should make sure that they are in speaker view.
Your Honor?
Yes.
Before
yeah, I'll give you a chance for preliminary in a moment. I promise I will. Thank you. Going off a script, I want to make sure I cover everything. So on the speaker view, the buttons in the upper right-hand screen, attorneys, please remember to mute your audio when the other attorney is speaking. And yes, before we begin with opening statement, any preliminary matters by the prosecution?
Yes, Your Honor. First, while we may not be in your courtroom, you are still a judge. We ask for freedom to move about our own courtroom.
Granted for both sides.
And next, we'd like to draw the court's attention to Stipulation 7. This states that Exhibits 4 through 33 have already been admitted and may be used throughout today's trial.
The court has read Stipulation 7, and because it is a stipulation, the court knows that both sides have agreed to those exhibits having been pre-marked and pre-admitted and may be used by either side without requesting permission or laying any foundation for those particular exhibits.
Next, Your Honor, we'd like to discuss Stipulation 9, stating that the defendant is in today's trial, and due to our online setting, the witness does not need to identify the defendant.
Very well. Any objection by the defense to that?
We have no objections, Your Honor.
So ordered. Thank you. Any further preliminary matters by the prosecution?
Yes, Your Honor. If an objection is sustained in today's trial, are we to assume that the answer has been struck from the record, or should we ask to do so?
You should ask to do so.
And lastly, Your Honor, if throughout today's trial you can't hear or see us or there's an echo, please let us know immediately so that we can fix the problem.
Likewise, same thing. I don't know if I'd have any idea how to fix the problem, but you can certainly point out that the problem does exist on my end. I would appreciate that.
With that, Your Honor, the people are ready to proceed.
Thank you. Any preliminary matters by the defense before we commence with opening statements?
Yes, Your Honor. Due to the online format, we have a question as to responding to objections. Would you prefer that we ask to respond to them, or would you prefer to ask us to respond to them?
I will, once the objection is made and the grounds are stated, you can go ahead and then you don't have to wait for me to invite you to respond. You go ahead and respond. If the objecting attorney wishes to be heard further, just ask if you may be heard. And the same thing with the responding attorney. And at some point, if everything's been argued, I'll make my ruling. If I feel there's a point where we need to cut it off, I will cut it off. But the initial response to the objection, you don't have to ask for permission to respond. You may go ahead and respond as soon as the objection has, and the grounds for the objection have been stated. That applies to both sides.
Yes, Your Honor.
That is by the defense.
With that, the defense is ready to proceed.
Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, so we will now proceed with opening statements, starting with the prosecution.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Please.
3 months. That is how long it took the defendant to plan and execute the murder of Dawn Clark. 3 months. So you'll learn a lot about the defendant. You'll learn that she is obsessed with elephants and would do anything for them. She loved elephants so much that when her and Mr. Clark got married, he bought her 6 of them. This is something she always wanted, yet something wasn't right. Mr. Clark used the elephants to run a zoo. You'll learn today that the elephants were kept in cages. They were locked up overnight, and customers were even allowed to ride them. You'll learn that this is everything the defendant hated. She wanted to run a sanctuary. She wanted the elephants to be free and roam. This even caused Mr. Clark and Miss Bassett to fight on numerous occasions. But you'll learn that in the end, it was Mr. Clark's property. They were his elephants, and it was his decision. So instead of continuing to fight, you'll learn that the defendant instead decided to take action. She decided to make a plan. On August 18th, 2017, the defendant 3 months earlier had finally convinced Mr. Clark to sign off on a power of attorney agreement. This document gave Miss Bassett power to all of his assets, including the elephant park. All Mr. Clark had to do was become physically unable or disappear. Once that document was signed, you'll learn that the defendant took 3 months to plan the murder of her husband. And on August 18th, 2017, that's when she decided to execute it. Testimony will show that that night she snuck up on Mr. Clark holding a lethal elephant tranquilizer. She reaches up, she inserts the syringe, and he dies immediately. Miss Bassett then places Mr. Clark's body in a wheelchair, goes to the van, drives 139 miles where she dumps his body. This is where you'll learn she knows he will never be found again. And 2 months later, October 17th, 2017, 2 months after Mr. Clark has been disappeared, don't be surprised when testimony shows that Miss Bassett confirmed she took power from that document, that power of attorney document. The first thing she decided to change was turn his elephant zoo into her elephant sanctuary. It took 3 months, but in October of 2017, she got everything she ever wanted. Now, in today's trial, it's we, the people, who have the burden. We have to prove to you the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And we'll do so today with physical evidence, documents, and witness testimony. We'll even show you the video of the defendant admitting the lengths she would go just for her elephants. And members of the jury, it's with this evidence that we'll meet our burden. And we'll show that the defendant took 3 months to plan and execute the murder of Dawn Clark. And I'll come before you again, and I'll ask you to find the defendant, Miss Bassett, guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Morris. Okay. Opening statement by the defense, please.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes, please.
No body, no weapon, no case. Members of the jury, today you just heard a story, but you're going to hear that the state took a few pieces of evidence and tried to fit them together. But without a body, without a weapon, and without investigating why, they overlooked a crucial fact that Dawn Clark was in deep trouble, but not because of Mrs. Bassett. Before I get into that, let me introduce you to Miss Bassett. Now, Kara Bassett runs a sanctuary for baby elephants. You'll hear her described as passionate, generous, and self-aware. In 2011, she and Mr. Clark got married, bought a piece of land in Tallahassee, and began their life together. Sure, all couples have their disagreements, but as Joe Young, a man who will take the stand today, will tell you, their relationship was affectionate. Now, you'll also hear about Don Clark. You'll hear that Mr. Clark traveled often to Costa Rica, that he had business deals there, dangerous business deals. And 2 weeks before Mr. Clark disappeared, he bought a property with off-the-books cash in Costa Rica, planning to disappear. Now, on August 19th, Miss Bassett woke up and her husband was gone, along with his van. Mr. Clark goes to Costa Rica often, so one day wasn't too much. But then one day turned into 2 days, turned into 3 days. Finally, after a week of managing the park on her own, she called the police. She was expecting them to find her husband. She was expecting them to bring him home, but it didn't end up like that. Now, we as the prosecution have the burden of proof. The prosecution has the burden of proof in today's case. This means that they have to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Miss Bassett is guilty of murder. That first, Mr. Clark is dead, and second, that Mrs. Bassett killed them. But they will not be able to do this today. Why? Because they found no body. They found no weapon. Without investigating why, they cannot bring you a case today. So the first question I want you to ask throughout this case is, where is Mr. Clark's body? You'll hear that the police were never able to find it, not after searching for a year, not after using search dogs. You'll never hear them say that they tested his body for tranquilizer. They can't tell you where exactly Mr. Clark died. They won't even be able to show you that Mr. Clark died in the first place. And you'll hear that on August 18th, Mr. Clark got a phone call from his businessman in Costa Rica. A scary phone call. His face turned white. You'll hear that on August 18th, it was time for Mr. Clark to disappear. Now next, you'll hear about the weapon. Now you're going to hear a lot about a missing syringe in this case, but members of the jury, you're not going to see this syringe in court today. You're not going to see any fingerprints tying this syringe to Miss Bassett, no blood tying this to Mr. Clark. You'll see nothing tying this syringe to the crime. And third, you need to ask yourself, where is the evidence that ties Miss Bassett to the crime? Mr. Young will come to you again and tell you that Miss Bassett loved her husband just as much as her elephants. Any argument that Miss Bassett killed Mr. Clark for her elephants just won't add up. Members of the jury, they have no body. They have no weapon. Without investigating why, they can't bring you a case today. That's why at the end of this trial, we're confident that you will find Miss Bassett not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. Before the government calls its first witness, I will ask everyone to please switch to the gallery view. That button's in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. This will allow you to see the attorneys and witnesses at the same time. Okay. At this time, the prosecution may call their witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution calls FBI agent Steph Branham to the stand. May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
Please introduce yourself to the jury.
My name is Special Agent Steph Branham with the FBI.
And what do you specialize in the FBI?
Criminal investigation. It's been 18 years now.
How were you involved in the investigation of Don Clark's disappearance?
Well, on August 25th, 2017, we were notified of a missing persons report filed by the defendant. We arrived on scene to investigate.
Did Mr. Clark go missing on August 25th, 2017?
No, ma'am. The defendant only called the police on August 25th. Don Clark went missing on August 18th.
Is Mr. Clark still considered missing?
As of today, no. Don Clark was reported by the defendant to be deceased. We also found evidence that indicates that he is deceased.
What evidence indicated that he was deceased?
We found a number of a number of individual pieces of evidence, ma'am. We found physical evidence, forensic evidence, as well as phone records and a power of attorney document.
Well, first, let's talk about where your investigation began. Where did you travel first?
We started at the Greater Tallahassee Elephant Park in Tallahassee, Florida, where both Don Clark and the defendant shared their residence.
What evidence did you find at the Greater Tallahassee Elephant Park?
We found physical evidence, ma'am. Carfentanil syringes. We located the defendant's boots that had a rare strain of algae, as well as phone records.
You first mentioned carfentanil syringes. Can you explain that to the jury?
There was a storage facility that had a number of elephant tranquilizers. We learned that these tranquilizers were used to sedate elephants at the park. When we counted the syringes, we found 23, while the logbook in the storage facility said there should be 24.
To your personal knowledge, based on your investigation, is carfentanil dangerous to humans?
Absolutely. It's a Schedule II controlled substance that is lethal to humans.
Next, you said what you found on the Greater Tallahassee Elephant Park were the defendant's boots. How were the boots relevant to your investigation?
Well, ma'am, the defendant's boots, as well as a Chevy Express and a wheelchair, all shared a rare strain of algae that we found both there as well as in the Big Gum Swamp.
Did the algae from Big Gum Swamp match the algae on the defendant's boots?
Our forensics team reported that it was a very high likely match to the Big Gum Swamp.
To your personal knowledge, had the defendant ever been to Big Gum Swamp?
It was our understanding that the defendant had not been to the Big Gum Swamp.
You said your understanding. How did you get to that conclusion?
Well, the defendant indicated that she had not traveled to the Big Gum Swamp, but GPS data indicated otherwise.
All right. Now, at the Greater Tallahassee Elephant Park, after you found the missing elephant tranquilizer, the algae, and the boots, as well as, what else did you find?
Well, beyond that, we found the phone records of Don Clark.
Mr. Patrick, can you pull up Exhibit 21, previously admitted? Agent Branham, can you explain this exhibit to the jury?
Well, this is a record of Don Clark's phone records the week that he went missing, August 18th through to August 25th.
What was the last text he sent?
The last text that Don Clark sent was at 11:14 p.m. It was to Kara Clark, and it says, going out for a while.
Is Kara Clark related to Kara Bassett?
Kara Clark is Kara Bassett, ma'am.
All right. And how did the defendant respond to that text that was sent, going out for a while?
Well, there was no response, ma'am.
What about a phone call?
I don't see a phone call here, ma'am.
All right. After you found the elephant tranquilizer, the algae, and the phone records, where did your investigation lead you to next?
We then went to the Belle Leon Airport, and we found the white Chevy Express van, as well as Mr. Clark's Cessna plane still in its hangar.
Let's talk about the van you found. Did you investigate the van?
Absolutely, ma'am. We looked, and we found 6 of Don Clark's hairs in the bed of the van. We also found that algae, as I mentioned, on the gas and brake pedals and along the driver's side floor panel of the van.
Do you have any indication of where the van went and how it got to the Belle Leon Airport?
Yes, ma'am. The van has a built-in GPS tracking system, and we have records of that GPS data. Exhibit 31.
Mr. Patrick, why don't you pull it up? Agent Branham, can you explain to the jury where Mr. Clark's van went the night he went missing?
Mr. Clark's van went on a trip, basically, from the Greater Tallahassee Elephant Park, 139 miles to the Big Gum Swamp in the middle of the night, from August 18th to August 19th.
Did you investigate Big Gum Swamp?
Absolutely, ma'am.
And what did you find there?
At the Big Gum Swamp, we found that algae, as I mentioned, consistent with that of the defendant's boots, and that was in the white Chevy Express.
Besides the evidence you found at the Greater Tallahassee Elephant Park, the local airport, as well as Big Gum Swamp, did you find any other evidence relevant to today's case?
Well, ma'am, there was a power of attorney document that we found in this case.
Have you seen the power of attorney document before?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Patrick, why don't we pull that up? Now, based on this exhibit, who had the power of attorney?
Well, the power of attorney was given to the defendant from Don Clark just months before Don disappeared.
And how would the defendant, Miss Bassett, get this power of attorney?
Well, there was a specific clause in this power of attorney that stated that in the event that Don Clark disappeared, all of Don Clark's assets would go to the defendant.
What assets?
Everything that was in Don Clark's possession, his vehicles, his properties, everything.
Did this include the elephant park?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you ever investigate Mr. Clark's bank records?
Yes, ma'am.
And what did you find from these bank records?
We found inactivity in his account for over a year.
And when was the last time there was activity on his account?
It was a year before he went, or a year from when we investigated, it was a year, ma'am.
All right. Had anyone ever seen Mr. Clark after he went missing?
Well, it's our understanding that while some people tried to look for him, we don't believe anyone saw him after he went missing.
Had you found any evidence in your investigation that Mr. Clark was in Costa Rica?
We talked to the Costa Rican police and locals there, and we did not come up with any of that evidence, ma'am.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
Your Honor may be heard.
Yes, go ahead.
Your Honor, this actually isn't a direct statement. This is just knowledge from the locals that he obtained, as well as, even if it was hearsay, this is not going to be used for the truth of the matter asserted, but subsequent remedial actions that Agent Branham took after he learned this knowledge.
Ms. Stewart, do you wish to respond?
Yes, Your Honor. So going to for the truth of the matter asserted, we believe that this evidence, the effect on the jury will be for the truth. The fact that the Costa Ricans did not see Mr. Clark in Costa Rica.
May be heard, Your Honor.
I believe. Yes, go ahead.
Your Honor, all this goes to show is that after he heard that, he then concluded his investigation. It's not the actual statement. It's showing that Agent Branham concluded his investigation after he heard this.
Your Honor.
Yeah, all right. I'm sorry, Mr. Stewart. I'll leave you the final word.
Yes, Your Honor. So this conclusion that Agent Branham came to was based on hearsay statements from the Costa Rican police and other people in Costa Rica, and so would be considered hearsay because it's based on hearsay statements.
All right. Thank you to both counsel. I'm going to overrule the objection. The answer given was that essentially no one was able to provide the agent with information that they had seen Mr. Clark. So that's kind of an absent of an information or absent of statement. But to the extent that that conclusion was based upon statements, the jurors are instructed that that information is not being offered for that the information was true, but only to help explain what, if anything, the investigators did next after they came to that conclusion. Counsel may proceed.
Agent Branham, did you find any evidence that Mr. Clark was in Costa Rica?
Well, we talked to the Costa Rican police, and no one could come up with any information that Don Clark had in fact been in Costa Rica.
What did you do after you found that information?
Well, once we had this lack of information from the Costa Rican police and the information we obtained in our investigation, we arrested the defendant for the murder of Don Clark.
Thank you, Agent Branham. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Thank you. Cross-examination, please.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Agent Branham. Miss Lee, would you please pull the GPS records up on the screen? Now, circled here, Agent Branham, is where Mr. Clark's van parked at the Big Gum Swamp. Am I right?
That is correct for 44 minutes.
You know exactly where this van parked?
Yes, that is what the GPS data indicates.
Now you said that the van parked for 44 minutes. Let's talk about what the hider would have done in those 44 minutes. Miss Bassett would have had to take a body of a man a foot taller than her out of the van.
That is correct.
And then she would have had to push the man in the wheelchair through the big gum swamp.
Yes, that is how that would happen.
Through this?
Excuse me, ma'am? Yes,
Through
the
this
big
swamp
gum.
right here? Now, Agent Branham, the defendant would have only been able to go about 15 minutes out and 15 minutes back, right?
15 minutes out of what, ma'am?
Out from the van and 15 minutes back to the van to hide the body.
If you're looking at the time it would take to dispose of the body, that would be correct.
So the body could only have been hidden in that 15-minute radius.
Whatever that radius is, sure.
And you'd agree with me that a person could only walk 15 minutes, maybe a half a mile?
We'll go with that.
Objection, Your Honor. Calls for speculation.
Counsel, should we hear?
Yes, Your Honor. It would be assumed that Agent Branham has walked for 15 minutes, and so this amount of time would be common knowledge.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
Yes.
There's no exact time on how far someone can walk in 15 minutes. This is calling the witness to speculate on how far the defendant could have walked in the swamp.
I'm going to overrule the objection. It goes to weight versus admissibility. The jurors understand have heard how long the van was parked. They've now are seeing a photograph of the conditions of the area where the van was parked, and this is a highly trained investigator who can give a reasonable opinion. Jurors may give it whatever weight they believe it's entitled. They may also use their common knowledge of the factual scenario of the act of the objection. And I believe the witness had partially or maybe had answered the answer to the extent that was given will stand, and directing the witness, if the witness has not completed its answer, you may do so at this time.
I'll re-ask the question, Agent Branham. You'd agree with me that a person could only walk about half a mile in 15 minutes, right?
We'll go with that, ma'am.
So in this 15-minute radius, you searched this radius for a year, am I right?
Yes, with trained dogs, given Don's scent.
Right, you used trained search dog units.
That is correct.
And you were never able to find Mr. Clark's body.
No, we were not.
Now, I want to talk about an algae investigation you mentioned on direct. Now, in this algae investigation, you searched Miss Bassett's boots.
The defendant's boots? Yes.
You searched her wheelchair.
We searched a wheelchair that was owned by the Elephant Park.
And you searched Mr. Clark's van.
That is correct.
And it was only after you sent those in to be tested, that you realized that the algae on those objects matched the algae in the swamp.
Once we had compared those locations of forensic evidence with the Big Gum Swamp, we found that it was highly likely from our forensics team.
Now, you didn't take any samples from the dirt, water, or holes in the Elephant Park, did you?
No, ma'am.
You didn't test anyone else's boots?
No, ma'am.
You don't even know if the boots that you tested Miss Bassett wore the night she allegedly committed this crime.
Could you repeat that, ma'am?
You don't even know if the boots you tested were the boots Miss Bassett wore if she drove to that swamp.
We knew that these were the defendant's boots.
But you don't know that she wore them that night.
No.
And you didn't test algae. You didn't test algae from any other of the swamps in Florida either.
No, just from the Big Gum Swamp, ma'am.
Okay, Agent Branham, let's talk about some of the people you've learned about in a letter from Mr. Clark's attorney. Ms. Lee, could you put up Exhibit 4 on the screen? Now, in this document, you learned about a power of attorney that Mr. Clark signed, right?
That is correct.
is this power of attorney document? I'm sorry. Now, also in this document, you learned why this power of attorney document was signed, right?
Yes.
You learned that there was concern about Costa Rica and those men Mr. Clark dealt with.
That is correct.
And then Mr. Clark didn't go into detail about.
That is correct.
Now let's talk about some of the other things you read in this letter. You learned that 2 weeks before Mr. Clark's disappearance, he wanted to close on a house in Costa Rica, right?
That is correct.
With off-the-books cash.
Yes, it's our understanding that he was never able to work out the details with his attorney, Mandy Tuminelli.
Now, you never investigated this off-the-books cash, right?
We never found the off-the-books cash, if that's what you're asking.
Right, and you never found that property that Mr. Clark wanted to close on.
No, ma'am.
So you don't know how much money Mr. Clark has right now.
We know all of the assets were given to the defendant.
But you don't know about this off-the-books cash and how much money was in that.
From the off-the-books cash, we do not know how much money that was.
Okay, now you also investigated the airport that Mr. Clark normally flies out of.
That's correct.
And you found the airplane in the hangar.
Yes, Don's airplane was still in the hangar.
You investigated the hangar 7 days after Mr. Clark disappeared.
That is correct.
Now, let's talk about the syringe you talked about on direct. Ms. Lee, can you put up Exhibit 19 on the screen? Now, according to this document, the last syringe was taken out on August 1st, right?
That is what it says on the logbook, ma'am.
And you studied this, you investigated the syringe container on August 24th, right?
Well, when we arrived on scene, we did count to see if there were 24 syringes.
All right, but your investigation was almost a month after August 1st, am I correct?
That is correct. That is correct.
Now, Miss Bassett wasn't the only person with access to the syringe, right?
It was our understanding that park employees had access to the storage facility.
Agent Branham, Mr. Clark had access to these syringes.
Those that were present at the Elephant Park did have access to the storage facility.
That's the yes to my question. Mr. Clark had access.
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Any redirect from the people?
Yes, Your Honor. Agent Branham, I'd first like to talk about the swamp that defense attorney brought up a lot. Now, I'd like to clarify, are there alligators in Big Dumb Swamp?
There are alligators, deer, hunters, and hikers, yes.
And how long after Mr. Clark went missing, where you assume he was dumped in the swamp, was he actually reported missing?
Well, he was reported missing 1 week after he went missing.
Thank you. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Any redirect by the defense?
Yes, Your Honor, briefly.
Please.
Agent Branham, you mentioned that there were alligators on redirect. Did you find a shoe with Mr. Bassett's there?
No, we did not find a shoe of Don Clark or Mr. Bassett's.
And you never found Mr. Clark's watch, did you?
No, ma'am.
You never even found Mr. Clark's sock?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. No further questions.
Any further redirect by the
No, Your Honor. May my witness be excused?
Yes. Special Agent, thank you very much. You are excused. Any further witnesses or evidence from the prosecution?
No, Your Honor. It's at this time that the people rest.
Thank you. Defense, you may present your witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Joe Young to the stand.
Okay, may proceed.
Would you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Sure. My name is Joe Young.
And how are you employed?
I'm a TV producer. I mostly do reality TV series and documentaries. You know, I like to say I got into the business that I didn't have to wear a suit, but hey, you got to play the part.
Now, Mr. Young, how do you know Kara Bassett?
Miss Bassett, she came to me in 2015. Funnily enough, she was actually a big fan of my work, and she wanted to film a documentary on this elephant zoo she was working at.
And what did your filming involve?
I was at the Elephant Zoo 5 days a week for a few years. Basically, for a documentary, you just want to get as much footage as you can and then pick the best parts from that footage. So really, I just filmed everything.
And who specifically did you film?
Mostly Kara, Dawn a little bit too, park staffers, the elephants.
And overall, how much footage did you get?
I think over the few years I was there, I want to say it's 2,000 hours of footage.
Now, Mr. Young, you mentioned that you filmed Dawn and Kara a lot during your time at the park. I'd like to talk to you about their relationship.
Sure.
How was your relationship with Dawn Clark?
It was good. I got to know Dawn pretty well over the 2 years I was there.
I'm now going to show you exhibits 6 and 7, pictures of Dawn Clark and Kara Bassett. How do you describe Dawn Clark?
Dawn, well, when it came to business, you know, he was all business. But after hours, he loved to party. He loved to travel. He was a really fun guy.
You mentioned you like to travel. Where to?
I know he has a vacation home or had a vacation home in Hermosa Beach, Costa Rica.
And how about Kara Bassett? How would you describe her?
I'd say she's smart. I think she's passionate about the elephants. She's
Objection, Your
generous.
Honor, improper character evidence.
Counsel?
Your Honor, pursuant to the rules of character evidence and the federal rules of evidence, the defense is allowed to bring out character evidence about their defendant.
People wish to be heard.
Yes, Your Honor, in that case, it's if the prosecution has already gone against the character and they're allowed to rebut those facts. The prosecution has not gone against Miss Bassett's character, and therefore that federal rule does not apply.
Defense wish to be heard?
Your Honor, first of all, I believe that it's the defense offers character evidence for the defendant, and then the prosecution is allowed to rebut. But the prosecution did bring out character evidence when they talked about how Mrs. Bassett loved her elephants.
There was testimony concerning that, and that would be a character trait. I'll allow brief testimony to respond to that the door was open to a small extent by the prosecution. So I'll overrule the objection, allow limited inquiry on character trait test to Ms. Bassett.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Young, I'll re-ask the question. How would you describe Miss Bassett?
Sure, like I was saying, she's smart, she's passionate about the elephants, and she's pretty kind too.
How would you describe her and Mr. Clark's relationship?
I'd say it was good from what I saw of it.
Did you notice any problems in their marriage?
You know, like any marriage, they got into a couple arguments, but that's just a husband and wife thing, right?
Now, when did you discover that Mr. Clark had disappeared?
Yeah, so the week that he disappeared, I was in Mexico on a trip, so I actually didn't find out until the 26th.
How did Mrs. Bassett take it?
You know, she was trying to put on a brave face, I could tell, but I mean, she was devastated. I honestly have never seen her that upset.
Objection, Your Honor. I renew my objection of improper character evidence, as this goes beyond what the prosecution's door opened on the character of Miss Bassett.
Counsel.
Your Honor, this evidence goes to refute the defendant's motive. It goes to motive and not propensity.
I'm going to overrule the objection. I don't believe his observations of her demeanor qualify as character evidence. So I don't believe it falls into that category. It's a percipient observation of a person's emotional state. It's been established that he has spent many, many hours with her over a 2-year period. And so he's in a position to be able to comment to his observations of visible the demeanor, and the jury can give it whatever weight the jury believes is entitled. So I'm going to overrule the objection on character evidence.
Mr. Young, how would you describe Miss Bassett after she learned Mr. Clark had disappeared?
Sure, like I was saying, she just seemed devastated that Dawn was gone. I honestly haven't seen her that upset.
Now, you mentioned that you found out on August 25th at the park. Did you find any unusual people there at the park?
Well, yeah, I mean, when I got back, I had no idea what had happened. So When I went to the park, I saw a bunch of FBI investigators. It was pretty jarring.
Okay, so at the FBI were at the park. Could you describe their investigation to us?
Yeah, I mean, from what I saw, they mostly spent time looking in the elephant enclosures. They didn't really ask me any questions, which I thought was a bit odd since, I'd been at the park so much. Yeah.
How about those 2,000 hours of footage? Did they ask you any questions about those?
No, from what I know, I mean, they didn't ask for it, excuse me. So they didn't watch a single minute.
And what did you see them do?
Like I was saying, they're just going around the elephant enclosures a lot. There were a couple park employees and staffers too. I never saw the FBI interview them either.
And did you see them looking through any of the evidence?
Yeah, one time actually I saw an FBI agent, not Agent Branham, the one that testified, but another one. It looked like he was handling the syringes without gloves.
Did anyone have to reprimand that person?
I
Objection
think
leading.
Agent Branham mentioned something that he shouldn't do that. I'm not sure.
You're on mute, Your Honor.
Disregard the answer at this time. Thank you. So the objection is,
Leading, Your Honor.
okay, counsel.
Your Honor, I believe no answer was elicited from that question.
I believe that the witness started to answer after the objection had been made. I'm going to sustain the objection on leading. The question suggested the answer. He specifically asked, did anyone have to reprimand the agent who handled the evidence without gloves? I believe that does fall within a leading question. So sustain the objection, but you can ask a different question or rephrase it.
Motion to strike that answer until the question has been rephrased.
Motion to strike is grand jury will disregard the answer that has been given thus far.
Yes, Your Honor. And how did Agent Branham react to the syringes handled carelessly?
I believe he reprimanded the agent that was mishandling.
Now, I want to talk to you about Mr. Clark's disappearance.
Okay.
Were you at the park that day?
On August 18th?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was. It was a normal day at the park for me, so I was there from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. just filming.
Was there anything unusual about this day?
At first, no. I mean, it went like completely normal day at the park, but towards the end of the day, excuse me, I did have a conversation with Mr. Clark.
And that conversation, was there anything unusual about it?
Yeah, I mean, we were just talking about the trip that I was about to take to Mexico, and all of a sudden he got a text. He just whips out his phone, looks at it, like all the blood rushes from his face. I mean, he looks terrified. And he says, I think I need to deal with this.
Mr. Young, I'm now showing you an exhibit of Mr. Clark's phone records. Do you see a call at 6 p.m. that day?
Yeah, it's from an unlisted number in San Jose, Costa Rica.
And how long was this call?
Looks like it says it was 52 minutes.
Now I'm going to show you a exhibit from Mr. Clark, a text Mr. Clark sent to Miss Bassett. Do
Okay.
you recognize this?
Yeah, Kara showed it to me.
And what does it say?
The timestamp says Friday, August 18th at 11:14 p.m.
And what does the text say?
It just says going out for a while.
Now, Agent Branham, Mr. Young, I'd like to talk about whether Mr. Clark did go out for a while.
Okay.
Did you investigate to see whether Mr. Clark had left?
Yeah, in 2018, I wanted to basically do my own mini investigation. So I went to Costa Rica to Don Clark's vacation home.
And how long after Mr. Clark's disappearance was this investigation?
I went to Costa Rica, I think a year after Mr. Clark disappeared.
And what did you find there?
Well, it was pretty odd, to be honest. So I snuck into his home. I saw that fans were on. The place was like completely spotless, like not a speck of dust. I actually saw some of his clothes in the closet.
Did the police ever ask you about the evidence you found in Costa Rica?
No, they asked me nothing about what I found.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Young, I'd like to first start this by asking about your relationship with the defendant.
Sure.
You met Miss Bassett in 2015, correct?
Yes, that's right.
And she hired you in 2015 to make a documentary of her.
Right, of the elephant zoo.
Now, you were paid for this documentary, of course, right?
Of course, yeah.
You were paid $5,000 a month.
Yeah, that sounds right.
You filmed for 3 years.
Yeah, I think that's what I said, 3 years.
So in total, the defendant paid you $180,000 for filming.
I don't think I've added up, but yeah, that sounds right.
On top of that, you were also going to be given 20% of the documentary's profit.
Yeah, of course, that's standard.
And it's true that the documentary got an offer for $10 million.
Yeah,
And this means you were to be given $2 million.
yeah, 20%, yeah, 2 million.
Now let's talk about the defendant in relation to Mr. Clark.
Okay.
Now, when you met Miss Bassett in 2015, she talked a lot about her elephants, right?
Yeah, from what I could tell, they really love the zoo.
And she told you she one day wanted to own the largest elephant sanctuary in the United States.
Yeah, they had big plans.
But when Mr. Clark was alive, they were running an elephant zoo. Isn't that true?
Yeah,
It wasn't until Mr. Clark disappeared that Miss Bassett opened an elephant sanctuary, right?
yeah, that's true.
You witnessed fights between Mr. Clark and Miss Bassett because Mr. Clark wouldn't change to an elephant sanctuary.
I mean, I don't know if I can say like the exact reason, but yeah, I saw them get into some arguments.
And one of these fights got violent, didn't it?
Yeah, I think one time, Kara, she picked up a vase and like threw it in his direction.
Exactly. The defendant grabbed a vase, right?
Yeah,
And she got so mad that she threw the vase at Mr. Clark's head, didn't she?
yeah. Like I was saying, I don't really know how mad she was or exactly why, but she threw it in his general direction. You're right.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
Counsel?
Counsel is
Yes.
asking this. Sorry.
Well, the objection was speculation. Response?
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
This is this witness's rational based perception on what he observed. He was there when the fight happened. He's testifying as to what he saw. If I asked a question that he doesn't know the answer to, he can say no.
Can you repeat how you phrased the question again, please?
I asked if Miss Bassett threw the vase at Mr. Clark's head.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yes.
I believe the question was the defendant got so angry that she threw the vase at Mr. Clark's head. This witness cannot be asked about the intensity of the anger Miss Bassett felt.
I'm going to sustain the objection. The witness can certainly testify to what he observed and what he saw leading up to the actions. But as phrased, it subscribes a motive to the action, which calls for speculation, calls for state of mind. So I'm going to sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Young, Miss Bassett grabbed a vase and threw it at Mr. Clark's head. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's true, in his general direction.
But it was at his head, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Now, I want to talk about the film that you've done of Miss Bassett. You provided today's case of a film of Miss Bassett, isn't that true?
yeah, a few clips, I think, from an interview.
You'd recognize Exhibit 38 if it were shown to you today in court?
Yeah, I'm sure.
From what you know, Exhibit 8 has not been changed or altered in any way since the last time you saw it.
I don't think so, no.
Your Honor, the people moved to admit Exhibit 38 into evidence.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor, I would object to more prejudicial than probative, as the prejudicial effect of this video on the jury is more significant than its probative value.
We are going to conduct a constructive sidebar right now outside of the presence of the jury. If I could see the video that we are referring to so that I could rule on the objections. So we are constructively at sidebar. The jurors are constructively not seeing what the court and counsel are about to see.
People look at me and they think I'm sweet and nice. Go on. Keep underestimating me. I will lobby senators. I will protest big businesses. I will get in your face. I will take people to their grave if I have to. I will do anything to protect these elephants.
All right, thank you. Now that the court has had an opportunity to view the exhibit, the objection on the grounds of more prejudicial than probative is overruled. There is significant and potential, or at least potential probative value in the statements, given the specific nature of the charges. So over defense objection, exhibit number 38 is received into evidence and may be utilized during closing argument by either side and will be received by the jurors in the jury deliberation room for their consideration.
Mr. Young, Exhibit 38 was taken before Mr. Clark went missing, isn't that right?
I think in June of 2017.
All right. Now, let's move on to your relationship with Mr. Clark. You spoke with Mr. Clark on the day he went missing, August 18th, 2017.
Yeah, like I was mentioning earlier.
You spoke about your upcoming trip to Mexico with him, right?
Yeah.
Mr. Clark never mentioned any trip he was going on, did he?
No, I don't remember him mentioning a trip, no.
In fact, he told you that he would see you when he got back?
Yeah, I think that's what he said.
Next, now, when he left to Costa Rica, when you got back from your trip to Mexico, you came back on August 26th of 2018, correct?
Yeah.
2017, pardon me. And that's when you found out Mr. Clark was missing, right?
Yeah, when I saw the FBI and asked them about it.
But you didn't think Mr. Clark was missing, did you?
Well, I was on a trip in Mexico, so I didn't know.
You believed Mr. Clark was in Costa Rica, didn't you?
I'm not sure what you mean.
When you got back, you heard the FBI were investigating the disappearance of Don Clark, correct?
Yeah.
They told you they believed Mr. Clark was dead, isn't that right?
Yeah.
You believed Mr. Clark was still alive?
Yeah, after I went to Costa Rica and snuck into his home.
Let's talk about that. So you believed he was alive, so you went to Costa Rica to investigate.
Exactly.
You broke into Mr. Clark's house.
I snuck in, yeah.
Let's talk about what you found there. Now, you said you saw the fan on and clothes in the closet, but you didn't see any cup of water lying around the house, did you?
A cup of water? No, I don't think so.
The lights were off?
Yeah, that's true.
The house was spotless.
Yeah.
And there was no toothbrush or shampoo in the bathroom?
No, no toiletries in the bathroom.
And you were there for a week, isn't that right?
Yeah.
You never saw Mr. Clark, did you?
In that week? No.
You never saw him in Costa Rica at all?
No, I was only there for a week.
All right. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor, briefly.
Proceed.
Mr. Young, opposing counsel mentioned that you were being paid for this video. How does this affect your testimony in court today?
I don't think it affects it at all. I mean, I'm here to say what I saw. I'm here to say what I saw in Costa Rica. I was going to be paid that money anyway.
Okay, now I want to talk about that video that just got entered. Can you tell us why was this video being filmed?
We were doing clips for our documentary on the elephant zoo.
And would this documentary be, and how would this documentary be shown to people?
On TV?
And finally, do you know of any other properties Mr. Clark may have?
In Costa Rica? No, I don't think so.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Any recross?
No recross, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. You are excused. Any further witnesses or evidence from the defense?
No, Your Honor. At this time, the defense rests its case in chief.
Thank you. We will now hear closing arguments from each party. Everyone should please switch back to speaker view.
Your Honor,
I'm sorry?
before we begin with closing argument, the people request a 5-minute recess if possible.
Any objection by the defense?
Defense has no objections.
Okay, I'm showing it is 12:54. We will reconvene at 12:55. Reconvene exactly at 1 o'clock.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, I'm showing that it's 1 o'clock. We will resume the trial. Bailiff, if you can restart the recording, please.
Ready to go, Your Honor.
May the people proceed with closing argument, Your Honor?
I don't think we've started recording yet, have we?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yeah, okay, good. Yes. Prosecution, you may give your closing argument at this time. Please go ahead.
3 months. That is how long it took the defendant to plan and execute the murder of Don Clark. 3 months. Mr. Clark was only 38 years old. He'll never get to experience all of what life has to offer. Members of the jury, while we can't bring him back, we can bring him justice. That's why we're here today, and that's why the defendant is being charged with murder. Today, I told you at the beginning of today's trial that we, the people, held the burden of proof. We had to prove the defendant's guilt today beyond a reasonable doubt, and we met that burden through 7 pieces of evidence you heard FBI agent Branham testify to. Now, before I get into that evidence, I want to talk about what the defense kept bringing up concerning the fact that there was no body found. And the question is that can you come to a verdict in today's case without a body? The answer is yes. And that's found in jury instruction 4 that the judge read to you before today's trial. Jury instruction 4 goes over the importance of circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence is a fact that the testimony of a fact that logically leads to the truth of another. Jury instruction 4 tells you that you can come to a conclusion in today's case based on circumstantial evidence alone. So no, we don't need a body. We don't need a murder weapon. We don't need eyewitnesses because we presented to you today a monumental amount of circumstantial evidence. So let's talk about that. We first presented to you today phone records of Mr. Clark. You saw that the last text sent was to the defendant, saying he was going out for a while. Now, the defense tried to paint a picture that Miss Bassett was a nervous wife whose husband had gone missing. But the text message responses that someone would expect when a husband goes missing, the "where are you going" text, the "okay, now I'm getting worried" text, the "please let me know you're all right" text, those never came. Why didn't the defendant text or call after Mr. Clark went missing? Because she already knew he was dead. Next, you heard about the missing syringe, an elephant tranquilizer. Members of the jury, you heard that it was missing with no explanation as to why when the defendant had been meticulous with the report. But who had access to these syringes? The defendant. Who was the last person to see Mr. Clark alive? The defendant. And who had a motive to use the syringe on Mr. Clark? The defendant. Next, you heard about a GPS report. You heard that on the night Mr. Clark went missing, his van drove from the Elephant Park to Big Gum Swamp. Members of the jury, this led us to the next crucial piece of evidence, the algae found on Miss Bassett's boots, connecting her to being at Big Gum Swamp. You heard how a forensic biologist tested the algae found on her boots, and that it was a highly likely match, that it originated at Big Gum Swamp. Yet when FBI agent Branham asked the defendant if she had ever been to Big Gum Swamp, to give us any indication that it wasn't really her who murdered Don Clark, she told us no. So why would she lie about being to Big Gum Swamp? Because that's where she dumped the body. Now today, the defense kept trying to bring up evidence that Mr. Clark was still alive. Well, besides the fact that no one's seen him or heard of him, members of the jury, we heard about his bank records. We heard that after he went missing, there had been no activity on his accounts. No money going in, no money going out. And that's because he's dead. But right now, what we're missing is motive. If it really was Miss Bassett, why would she kill him? That brings us to the power of attorney you heard a lot about in today's trial. You heard that 3 months before Mr. Clark went missing, this document was signed that gave Miss Bassett power over all the assets, totaling $8 million. But more importantly, power over her elephants. And after Mr. Clark disappears 2 months later, she invokes that power, and the first thing she decides to change was turn his elephant zoo into her own elephant sanctuary. You heard the defendant on video today. You heard that she would send someone to their grave for her elephants. And that's exactly what she did on August 18th, 2017. Today we met our burden. We met our burden through the phone records, the missing syringe, the GPS report, the algae match. Members of the jury, we met it through the bank records and the power of attorney. Miss Bassett took 3 months to plan and execute the murder of Don Clark. The evidence spells it out. Find the defendant guilty. Thank you.
You may give your closing argument.
Yes, Your Honor. Members of the jury, the state just gave you a few pieces of evidence and tried to fit them into a story. But members of the jury, their story just doesn't make sense. Sure, they don't have a body. Sure, they don't have a weapon, but the most important fact is that they didn't investigate why. And because they didn't investigate why, they can't bring you a case today. Now, the prosecution has the burden of proof in today's case. That means that they have to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Miss Bassett is guilty of murder. That first, Mr. Clark is dead, and second, that Miss Bassett is the one that killed her own husband. Now, if you have any reasonable doubts, any questions at the end of today's case, you must find her not guilty. And as you've seen from today's trial, we're left with nothing but questions. Because they don't have a body, they don't have a weapon. Without investigating why, they can't bring you a case. So the first question I told you to ask in the beginning of opening statements is, where is Mr. Clark's body? You heard the police weren't able to find him, not even his shoe, not even his watch. You heard Agent Branham admit that Miss Bassett could only have hidden him in a 15-minute radius. But after searching that 15-minute radius for a year, after using search dogs, they still weren't able to find him. They didn't test him for tranquilizer. They can't prove he died there. They can't even prove that Mr. Clark is dead. But maybe they didn't look in the right place. Now, the prosecution just tried to bring you a story, but they forgot some key pieces of evidence. So let's take a look at them. First, Mr. Clark signs a power of attorney document with a disappearance clause. You heard that when he signed it, there was concern about Costa Rica and those men Mr. Clark dealt with. Members of the jury, Miss Bassett didn't sign this because she wanted to kill Mr. Clark. Mr. Clark signed this because he knew he might have to disappear. Because you heard he was involved with businessmen, dangerous businessmen. Now, 2 weeks before Mr. Clark disappears, he buys a secret house with off-the-books money without telling his wife. Now, the prosecution is trying to tell you that Mr. Clark couldn't have died because his bank records don't show any transactions, but they never investigated this off-the-books money. They never investigated this secret house. The day Mr. Clark disappeared, he got a text, and a phone call from Costa Rica. You heard that when Mr. Clark got these texts and phone calls, he got scared. His face turned white. On August 18th, it was time for Mr. Clark to disappear. Now, the state immediately ruled out this possibility. After all, the airplane was still in its hangar. But members of the jury, the state never investigated the hangar for that week after Mr. Clark disappeared. They don't know where his plane went. He could have easily flown it out and paid someone to fly it back. And finally, a year after Mr. Clark disappeared, Joe Young saw that his usual house in Costa Rica was clean. Its fan was on. There were no clothes. He was living in a secret house, but he had been to his usual house. Members of the jury, Mr. Clark could be traveling as we speak, but the state never investigated it. How can we prove that Mrs. Bassett killed Mr. Clark if we can't even prove he was dead? 3 months. That's how much time it takes for Don Clark to prepare to fake his own death. So the second question you need to ask today is, where is the murder weapon? You heard the police weren't able to find that either. They don't know whether Mrs. Bassett's fingerprints on that syringe. They don't know whether Mr. Clark's blood is on that syringe. They don't have any evidence tying that syringe to Mr. Clark or Miss Bassett. We can't even call it a murder weapon because there's no evidence it was linked to a crime. Let's talk about what could have happened to this syringe. You heard Mr. Young tell you that there is another person with access to this syringe. The police that investigated this syringe. You heard that these police officers were handling these syringes carelessly, that Agent Branham had to reprimand them. We don't know whether they dropped, miscounted, or misplaced one of those syringes. They overlooked another party with access, Don Clark himself. Ladies and gentlemen, if Don Clark had been trying to go to Costa Rica to get away from those businessmen, he could have easily faked his own death by grabbing one of those syringes as he walked out the door. And we don't know. So what actually happened to Mr. Clark? Well, like I said, we can't be sure. He could be alive. He could be dead. We may never know for certain. And that's not enough to convict Mrs. Bassett. So the final question you need to ask today is, where is the evidence that ties Miss Bassett to the crime? You heard a lot about an algae investigation on direct, but the state never investigated the algae at the park. Miss Bassett used the van, the wheelchair, the boots at the park. They got dirty. The state considered the match to the Big Gum Swamp and considered it sufficient, but without investigating the algae at the park, it just isn't. Now, they also tried to show you this video of Miss Bassett, and they tried to connect that video to the murder. But ladies and gentlemen, Miss Bassett, like Mr. Young told you, was doing this for a documentary. This isn't something that she was trying to be true to. She was trying to raise her drama for the documentary. You can't regard that as motive. Members of the jury, they found no body. They found no weapon. Without that, they can't bring you a case today. Miss Bassett isn't an ambitious killer. She's an elephant lover. Most importantly, a wife. Now, the state tried to make a story with their evidence, but that just ended up being a patchwork. They ignored the fact that Mr. Clark was in deep trouble, but not because of Mrs. Bassett. That evidence does not cease to exist simply because it is ignored. Today, you saw the entirety of the evidence. Find Miss Bassett not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Does the prosecution wish to give a rebuttal?
Yes, before I begin, Your Honor, may I inquire as to how much time I have left?
Yes.
All right, I got it in the chat. Thank you, Your Honor.
Oh, you got it? Okay. How much time do you have remaining?
58 seconds.
Thank you.
May I proceed?
Yes.
You just heard the defense tell you no body, no weapon, no case. But members of the jury, you have to remember jury instruction 4 that the judge read to you before trial. You have to remember the importance of circumstantial evidence. It says you can make your decision on today's case on circumstantial evidence alone, without a body, without a weapon, because we have a case today. We presented to you a monumental amount of circumstantial evidence, because what in today's case did the phone record, the syringe, the GPS report, the algae match, the bank records, and the power of attorney all have in common? Miss Bassett. Miss Bassett wanted one thing. She wanted control over the elephant park. And she went to kill Mr. Clark. That's the length she would go. And she told you that on camera. Find Miss Bassett guilty.
Thank you, counsel. Thank you to all counsel and witnesses. I'm going to ask the jurors to please complete your scoring ballots and submit them. And I'll ask if you can please then unmute and unblock your videos once you have done so. And that way I'll know that those ballots have been submitted before we make any comments to our competitors.